Well, everyone, we'll start in just a moment. We'll let people join this webinar today. As you're settling in, please note the poll question that was launched. And if you'd like, let us know how you're using InfoReady for administrative approvals. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this Peer Spotlight webinar, where we have our wonderful guests from Syracuse University that will be covering automating administrative approvals. And they're going to talk about their process, what into setting it up and how they executed that in InfoReady. So our guests today are Dr. Christina Lee Doctour and Dr. Chetna Chianesi from Syracuse University. They are both with the Office of Research there and within Proposal Development Services. And I would just like to say I have worked with them many times in the past, and they do a great job getting the most out of InfoReady that they can. So I'm really happy that they're able to do this webinar for you today. So a few logistics to cover before I hand over the reins to them, and they can cover what you came for. So the presentation is scheduled for 20 to 30 minutes, and then the remainder of the time will be saved for Q&A with our panelists. The phones are muted, and if you'd like to ask a question, and we definitely encourage it, please use the Q&A feature. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and so we'll make this available within the next week or so and send it out to everyone who registered for the webinar. And you'll also be able to share that with any colleagues who may have been interested in attending the webinar, but were unable to do so. Now, without further ado, I turn it over to our panelists today, Christina and Chetna. Take it away, please.
All right, thank you very much, Carlos, and welcome everybody. Got a nice bright orange slide for you here to start off with. I'm Christina Lee Doctour, the Director of Proposal Support Services in the Office of Research at Syracuse University, and I'm joined by our Associate Director, Chetna Chianesi. We're going to walk you through administrative approvals that we have been operating over the past few years and due to COVID at Syracuse University. Next slide. And so we're going to set the stage, just give you a little bit of information about SU. Next slide, please. So Syracuse is a private research university located in gorgeous central New York. If you haven't been here before, I would recommend that you come and see us, both for winter and summer pleasure. We are considered, or we are categorized as an R1 research intensive institution by the Carnegie classification, which is up from our R2 status in 2015. I will note that we're a predominantly liberal arts institution. We do not have a medical school. Currently, we have approximately 79 million in sponsored funding for the past fiscal year. We have just under 1,000 tenure and tenure track faculty and significantly more part-time and non-tenure track faculty, and about 20,000 students all told with undergrads and graduates. Next slide, please. So who are we? Proposal Support Services. Wish we were known as research development. People that know me have heard that before, but that's a bear we have yet to wrestle with well. So this particular unit is new to the Syracuse University in 2018, which we came about because our VPR was new, coming from Auburn, and he had a similar unit at his university, and so he stood it up when at the same time. So Proposal Support Services is essentially a research development unit. So we do things such as manage the multiple intramural grant programs that we have, limited submission services, award nominations, training and development, and we coordinate other trainings for the entire office as well as institutionally, as well as offer some ourselves. We hopefully do more and more with benefits of service systems like InfoReady, grant development for large and multidisciplinary projects. You know, limited submissions is one of those things that we are trying to maximize with it. And Chetna and I operate, some of you may have similar systems or have heard of schools and colleges that do this. We operate with a combined central and non-central system, in that we have our Office of Proposal Support Services, and then we have an informal yet significant team that we call the SURD team. So we have representatives in 6 of the schools and colleges at Syracuse University, so not all, but a good number, as well as other central units like our Corporate Foundation Relations Office and our libraries, and from significant interdisciplinary centers. And so we act as a team. There's very few reporting structures there, but we act collaboratively and speak regularly, and they are our foot soldiers in trying to manage as well as utilize InfoReady. Next slide, please. All right, so on to our InfoReady adoption. So I already noted that we had a VPR that brought in and stood up our particular office. Well, he also brought in the idea of using InfoReady to manage the new large intramural grant program that we also had developed the same year. A lot of stuff happening here in 2018 in research development. So the large grant program that came about, we had done intramural grant programs before, but they were interspersed. I say this very rare, and I say this as someone who's been at SU for 23 years. So they come here or there, but in 2018, we started a large institutional investment in intramural grant programming, approximately $1 million a year just for our main program. And so it was daunting, the thought of managing it without some kind of system. So our previous VP had used InfoReady at his prior institution, and so we took a look at it. I will note that one of the primary reasons we looked at InfoReady seriously was a webinar I attended that was held, and Ryan Champlain from Pittsburgh was the person that did it. He's currently a very, very collaborative person that we work with a lot, but it was his presentation that really helped me think about InfoReady as a solution to our needs, and we looked at it further. So since that time, since starting it off late in 2018, we've really blossomed in our usage. So currently 3 of the 5 operating units out of the Office of Research utilize InfoReady. And we, in addition, have 10 other academic units that are outside of the Office of Research that run the gamut from dean's offices, academic affairs, centers and institutes, and departments. And they run their own competitions, but we still provide training and overall management of the system. So just as a snapshot, in 2020 alone, we launched 60 competitions, and that included our first administrative approvals that we use this for. At that time, we did 35 limited submissions, 16 internal funding opportunities, 3 events, and then 6 new administrative approvals. And we're going to talk about those next. Next slide, please. And I'll toss the mic over to Chetna.
So, here's going to be the bulk of what we talk about for administrative approvals. So next slide. So we were, when we first started using InfoReady, we did know that administrative approvals were a thing, were a capability. I had looked at a case study from Saginaw Valley State University, which used unmanned aerial system flights. That case study is still available on InfoReady's page, so take a look at that. But we hadn't launched any of our own administrative approvals. But with the COVID closures, we had a need for fast approvals. So we just had a new need. And we needed multi-layer approval processes for people to access campus. And then they needed many sets of eyes on those approvals. The secondary need was we wanted a general awareness of what COVID research was actually occurring on campus, so that we may need to have some oversight of, if people were working with COVID protocols. And then we also had to be able to provide lists and data on all of those approvals, all those people who were granted access to campus, to our COVID safety committee, our emergency services and risk management, and our Department of Public Safety. So we kind of became the default place where anybody who was not considered essential staff, if anybody else who needed to access campus could access it that way. And frankly, we were also a little worried about one of us getting sick. So we wanted to make sure that we had redundancies in place. So this could not live in an email system. This really needed to be a centralized system. So that was our need. The next slide. So why did we decide that InfoReady was the right solution? We'd actually looked at forms as well to see if we could just have it submitted by forms and route things. But we wanted submissions to be automatic and then start routing things for approvals. We didn't want to get hung up on any particular email step, but we also wanted those notifications to keep us up to date on when things were being approved. With InfoReady, we have the email notifications and a dashboard that we can check regularly when reviews are active, completed, etc. And now that we have the customized views, the dashboard is just so easy to use and really keep on top of those approvals, rather than, in the beginning, every time one email came in, we were going in immediately as soon as we could to check them. But now we can just do periodic checks, and I only check a couple times a week nowadays. But then we also wanted that centralized source again to keep all these records for those approval requests. I'll note, we put a little asterisk here. We use applicant-driven routing steps, so it automatically routes things for approvals. This has its pluses and minuses, so we'll get into that in a little bit in the presentation. Next slide. Some of the added benefits of why we're able to use InfoReady, and generally this is true of some forms as well. There's a fixed format, right? If you try to do this via email, people aren't going to fill in the information you want. But this has a fixed format, and this has multi-level routings, which was important, and we wanted them to be sequential. Other systems we found could send it to 3 people, but our VPR didn't want to look at it unless the chair and the associate dean had reviewed it first. So that was important for us. But generally, this cuts down on email so much, and it doesn't put the responsibility with one person. Without InfoReady, we were going to resort to emails, and that was just going to be, very problematic. Again, like I said, we found that applicants wouldn't provide the data if we didn't put it in some kind of form, and we would have had to manually create spreadsheets to track everything. It was just not scalable. Go ahead to the next slide. So what were those administrative approvals that we ended up launching? So these are all pandemic related approvals. We had 6 of them. I'm not going to go into details on what we put into the campus, return to campus stuff. There was a really nice presentation by UMass Lowell already on that, so take a look at those. But in the end, we had 3 competitions related to coming back to campus. That was about 100 applications. We have 3 ongoing applications. Essential research travel, resuming in-person human subjects research, and visiting scholars coming to SU's campus. So you can see the volume. I said we have 134 travel applications, for example. Last week we had, 2 weeks ago when we started this presentation, we had 119. So these things continue to increase even now when we're still using them. The biggest challenge that we've had on administrative approvals is adapting the existing competitions for changing federal, state, and institutional requirements, and just different guidance. And we had some missteps in the beginning, and we will kind of go through that of what we learned going through this. But it's been generally very helpful. So the next slide. So here's the list of those 6 pandemic-related approvals. We've had other units start putting in research approval or putting in other approvals, admin approvals, but these are the ones that are housed in our office, the Office of Research generally. Disclosure of essential research activities, that was, what came in the week after we closed. People said, I need to access my lab because I have, animals or so forth, or, I just need to check that my freezer is still working. That was launched very quickly. We sunsetted that, and we just hadn't set it up properly. It was very quick, and we didn't realize that we could adapt things to change a competition. So we said, we just got to close that down and start over. So then we had disclosure of research activities, and we also had tell us if it's COVID related. And so instead of being able to use check boxes maybe to designate that it was a COVID activity, we had a different competition. Those were just until we generally allowed people back on campus. This was when the state wasn't allowing us on campus. So those 3 we're not really going to talk about. And then the 4th one is return to face-to-face research. That's still active. That is the supplement to IRB approval. And this is, we're still, not generally allowing everybody to come to campus for research. There's different reasons. We're not going to talk about that because we don't manage that, so we don't know the details too much. We help them set it up though. Christina manages the visiting scholar requests, and then I manage the approval for travel requests. And we've been better about making changes, and we'll kind of go through how we've made changes and what we can do with this automation. Next slide. So general tips on using administrative approvals. Use the general template for simplicity. We had never used the general template before, so we defaulted to using the funding opportunity template, and that was a mistake. It just, there's too many access fields. It wasn't necessary, and there were items that confused people. The applications will still require a title, and that was confusing to people. So kind of guide them on what you want in there. We ideally, if you're having a travel, you'd like to say, travel by this person to this location, and people don't put that in, but we ask them to do so. And sometimes we change the title so that we can make that easier. We actually go in to edit their applications. Use the approve, do not approve routing step. That's kind of our default. As I mentioned, we use applicant-driven routing steps rather than department-driven routing steps. I'll go into a little bit more in just a second. But this approve, do not approve allows comments to the administrator. We've enabled that. And then we do sequential routing rather than parallel routing. Once you start a competition with applicant-driven routing steps, you can't change the structure of applicant-driven routing steps. Like we wanted to change, what displays to applicants when they see it. We're not allowed to do that. You can't change the number of steps. You can't change labels. So really think about how you're doing applicant-driven routing steps. On the back end, when an application comes in, you can do some editing, like you can change the reviewers and so forth, but you can't change the structure of that. One thing that we've done is that if we will get a lot of new reviewers through this system. So as I mentioned, we have chair, associate dean, and vice president approval. Sometimes the chairs would be new, or it's a department that hasn't used InfoReady before. Frankly, like the English department may not have done a lot of work in InfoReady before, so they just aren't familiar. They don't know necessarily that this travel approval is required. So I just send them an email, for example, to say, this is what we need you to do. It's not spam. Please just look at this and approve, and this is what we expect for you. So that's some general comments that we had come up with. And the next slide. So what does what do these competitions look like? So here is our essential research travel application. In February of 2020, the university halted all non-essential travel. And that became a complete halt in March of 2020. But we still had requests for research travel to maintain continuity of long-term research. In the beginning, it was primarily ecological, biological samples or observations. So we started that in June of 2020. And this is for any travel that's deemed essential for research. We did not handle any student activities, any academic travel, and at the time we still weren't allowing any conference or training travel. This competition has been revised several times. This is the only iteration of travel. So for example, we had a vaccination requirement in July of 2021. So we had to add in some questions about, have you met the vaccination requirement by the university? At times where we've had quarantines, we've put in questions like, where are you going to quarantine when you come back? Are you going to be able to teach your classes when you're quarantined? So forth. And then we also have had, sorry, that came earlier than July of 2021, but and in July of 2020 is when we allowed unrestricted domestic travel. So this became just it changed from essential research travel to essential international travel only. So we've added and removed questions throughout the time. The description has changed multiple times. I wanted to note here that we don't log travel information necessarily. Like, this isn't the place where people come to us that say, hey, there's an emergency in Italy. Who do we have in Italy? Risk management does that. In our notification of award, we do tell people you need to register your travel. So there are instructions in the notifications when they go out. We use a template that we've revised also. That has been really helpful to say things like, make sure you quarantine and make sure you follow this. And that has changed multiple times as well. And then on the right, you'll see our 3 routing steps. Again, these are sequential, and it's got our email for the chair, email for associate dean, and vice president for research. And now, oh, sorry, one more thing on here. The first step on applicant-driven routing is automated. It will go to that person automatically. The next steps are only contained in digests. So ours are set for Monday, Thursday digests. If you want it to be sent immediately, all you got to do is push that resend button and it sends it to them right away. That is really easy to do via mobile. So we just, I see an email from a chair come in, I click view application, I resend, it takes 30 seconds on mobile. So it's pretty easy. Next slide. I just want to give you an idea of what the dashboard looks like. So here's our travel applications. You can, sort by approved, reviews active, approved, and you can see where it's stuck and just kind of go into applications and push them along. I'll resend the notifications just as a reminder a lot of times, or I might email them out of the system as well. That is it for essential travel. So turning it over to Christina.
Okay, don't move the slide yet, because I just want to point out a little something here. So one of the things that we talked about is a real, lifesaver for us early on was the fact that we now have the customizable dashboard. So Chetna put in this picture of a dashboard. I'm like, Chetna, you got to get rid of that funded column here. Give yourself some more real estate to put the important stuff on there. And so we do customize our dashboards all the time. So in this case, for approvals, there's a whole bunch of rows or columns that are automatically in your dashboard screen that you won't need, that are based on a funded competition. So we'll strip them out, and one caveat to that is if you edit a competition, which we're now becoming pros at, it defaults to the original dashboard. So you have to reset your preferences. But even so, we really thank you, Carlos, thank you, everyone. We really enjoy being able to customize our dashboard so we could see the pertinent stuff right on the screen right when we open up a competition. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm gonna, cognizant of our time, I'm just gonna sort of skim through some of the stuff, and then we can answer whatever you want in questions, but we still have quite a few slides. So visiting scholar requests is another one of our competitions that is open. And this is to handle academic visitors on campus. And so it is for periods of longer than a week. Where does that time come from? We pulled it out of the air, and that's what the university is stuck with, so it's a little bit more than a few days. And that's what we've gone with. So anybody who's like not a vendor or does not have a paid institutional appointment and they're going to be on campus for longer than a week using campus facilities, then they have to go through the scholar request process. So for us, that involves, Fulbright fellows, visiting faculty who are working on a particular project in somebody's lab, visiting graduate students who are not a student here, but perhaps working with a faculty member here, speakers that are here perhaps for like a week-long workshop, or community participants that come in frequently to work on projects or with our faculty that are accessing campus frequently. Okay, next slide, please. We'll switch back to Chetna for a minute.
Yep. So we had a lot of lessons learned from all of our approval processes. We kind of gradually learned these. So it took us actually a few years to be really comfortable with experimenting with some of the problems that we were having. And once we started experimenting, we realized what the system was fully capable of. So really talk to your InfoReady reps. They have been so helpful. I just emailed support this morning about something and they emailed me back within 5 minutes and they gave me all these answers. They're great. We've talked to Carlos. We've had Carlos walk us through a few things. Jordan has sat down with us, who's our rep, talk through the potential solutions. They have a lot of ideas. And then share tips internally, because Christina and I, like when we sat down to make this competition, we're like, oh, you can do that this way. And, we realized things we didn't even know from each other. And then not all competitions have the same needs. So what Christina does is not the same as what I do. They're pretty complex needs sometimes. So recognize that your solution will not always work, and think broadly about what you can do. Like I said, we weren't initially okay adding new fields and requirements, and we really got comfortable with that. Next slide. So some of the challenges we had, the routing steps, we use applicant-driven routing because, again, department-driven routing steps don't work for us. So you have to manually enter the email addresses. If there's an error, it won't route to a person. If they use an alias email, so we have single sign-on. If they use law.syr.edu instead of syr.edu, it does not route to the approver. So we have to go in and check those manually. That's not hard. It's very easy to see when the address is wrong. And then, like I said, secondary routing steps do not generate notifications. You have to resend. You have to hit resend. Both of those are easy to do via mobile. Next step. Next slide. Christina.
All right, so either you're with us so far or you're not. So if you haven't thought about using InfoReady for approvals, then this is going to be a lot more points and sort of hard, but the biggest takeaway from this would be you can work with InfoReady and you can contact us if you have questions on stuff that sounds sort of familiar. But I'm going to give you a handful more of challenges and solutions, and then we'll open up for questions. So next challenge is application information that is difficult to see some information without going into each application. So we're really, because of it's just like a funding application. There's stuff we wanted to get to, and we had a hard time without opening up each individual application. So ta-da, dashboard updates, and we can move things around and see what we want at a glance, which is helpful, like Chetna said, when you're just seeing where things are stuck and how many that you have that are pending. Challenge number 3, application information, again, difficult if there's secondary information required. So this is my big problem. Visiting scholars. So we put the visiting scholars up. We initially were just letting people on campus. As we were letting campus members back, there were requests to have people that were non-campus members. So at first they just had to perform an attestation that they were vaccinated, but as everybody knows, we were required as a federal contractor to start accepting and reviewing proof of vaccination. So I collect university IDs that are created for the visitors and proof of vaccination, but that's done after the conditional approval. They have to receive a conditional approval to even potentially host this person on campus. before, in some cases, they can procure a university ID. And that is often the case for international visitors. So they need help from our Center for International Services in order to get their visa requirements done. But the Center for International Services has an agreement with us that they won't perform that assistance until they have the conditional approval for the visitor to come. This is loosening up a little bit, but needing that information afterwards was a huge bottleneck for us. And so the solution provided by InfoReady was genius. And I hadn't thought of it because this wasn't a competition. We can use reports to get the post-approval information. So as soon as somebody receives a conditional approval, I send them out a report request, and that report requires SUID numbers and uploaded proof of vaccination. So that could be done once that information is provided and can be downloadable as a spreadsheet. Next slide, please. All right, challenge number 4, again, visiting scholars, is the need for an additional approval step. So getting that additional information from reports is genius, but we need a way to track whether or not those materials have been approved. So has the proof of vaccination been approved and accepted? And are they cleared to come to campus? So this is our clearance approval step. And there's no way to do that in reports. So what, on a call, an emergency call with Carlos, and saying, I just can't think through this. I don't know what to do. I need to get this done. He's like, well, why don't you use a blank field in your original application and make it an administrative note? Again, genius, absolutely wonderful. So we added the blank field that we can say, once something's been reviewed and approved, we actually go in and edit the application that's already been awarded, and that we note that this is now the materials have been received and this person's cleared to come to campus. And then in our customizable dashboard, we make sure that that column shows, and I could see at a glance who's actually already cleared and who's not. Next slide, please. So, however, there's a few issues that still sort of we're working on. And one is that the applications can't be returned for editing when you're doing a multi-stage approval or review process. This is problematic for our applicants that understand that visitors have to be vaccinated, but they submit their application for conditional approval and note that the visitor is not yet vaccinated. Well, our vice president for research will not approve the application, even if there's a plan to get vaccinated, not until they're vaccinated can they get the conditional approval. So I can't return the application to the applicant to say, just submit it again when you are vaccinated, unless I actually decline it. And then they have to put in all the information again. InfoReady recommended that we add a 4th stage review to the competition, whereby Chetna and I would be the first reviewers and we could check it for compliance. I didn't want to do that for quite a few reasons. So we actually, now that InfoReady has taught us to fish instead of giving us the fish, we innovated and say, let's just use that note field to put an administrative hold on. We remove the reviewers. And so basically the application sort of, it stalls in the system, doesn't go anywhere, but we can see by those notes in our column on our dashboard that it's on an administrative hold. I let the departments know when they have updated vaccination information, they just have to shoot me a quick email. So that's 2 extra emails, but it enables them not to have to put all their information in there again. And I can track it easily and visually. Next slide, please. So challenge number 6, and this is the last challenge I think we're going to know, is that as the situation aged and as everything changed, some information can be provided early and some can't. So as I said before, international scholars is really something that is handled and has a much different timeline trajectory than a domestic visiting scholar would. And so I needed a way to flexibly address this different types of populations in the same competition. So this is what we did. We have now an option, again, Carlos's idea, an option to upload materials early if available. And so we have that new administrative field that's just for us, but there's also an option for the applicant to say, it's a domestic visitor. They already sent me their vaccination information. People tend to have it right on hand now. So they submit it, and with their application, when the conditional approval is received, I can actually change it and change the award notice and make it a, you have been approved and cleared to come to campus. This has happened now 4 times. We just started this in the last week or so, and this has happened 4 times in the last week that we've taken something that's taken a couple weeks normally or even longer and been able to turn applications around just in a few days because everything was provided up front. And yet we're still addressing the international visitors that will take longer because they're working on their visas. So that's it. That's all we have, but we're definitely open for questions. So you can put our contact information, flip to the next slide if you want, Carlos. As I said, we've got a lot more information. We do have a series of challenges that have not quite been addressed that are development requests that are out to InfoReady. And I think we work very collaboratively in making sure that those things come about. And I think the robustness of the system, especially for these types of applications, is an absolute testament to InfoReady as an organization working with their academic clients and finding the best solution. So never, ever, ever be afraid to ask. And I think we can open up to questions unless you're chiming in now, Carlos.
I am going to chime in really quickly. First, I've been blushing the whole time, so from the compliment. So that's why I've been off camera. But I did want to point out a couple things. There were follow-up items in relation to topics you and Chetna brought up. One, Chetna mentioned the emergency contacts for travel. And she also mentioned she read a case study from Saginaw Valley State in the past. Incidentally, that same institution uses InfoReady to collect travel information, and they use it for their as a source of the record for emergency contacts. So if anyone's interested, I can share the resources with you. One other thing about applicant-driven routing steps, you can actually set them to run in parallel to one another ahead of time before launching. So if you ever needed them to run multiple steps to run concurrently rather than sequentially, you'd be able to set that up. And let us know if you have more questions about that. And then lastly, the system has a feature where you can share templates with admins from other institutions. And so that's something I recommend if you ever have that need or have an inquiry like that, you might want to request that over the listserv. So
that's good information.
Quick rundown of follow-up items before we got into the Q&A. So first Q&A, first of all, it says thank you to you two, and I echo that, thank you. It says, the question is, ask when you began using InfoReady, and did you have another management system prior that you had managed any of these processes?
It was the end of 2018. It took us quite a few months to get up and running. Well, first to determine who we were going to go with. And we did seriously look at a few other competitors. And there was some institutional struggle on what we should go with, and I won. And so we started working with InfoReady in 2018. I think it was like mid 2018 actually, and we did not have any other applicable system. I should say the Office of Research did not have an applicable system, but another one of our academics units did, and it was a competitor, and that's where some of the struggle came from.
And I'll add that for our first iteration of our intramural funding program, it was an email the head of OSP with your application. And I remember saying to him before the solicitation went out, you should use a form at least. And he didn't even have a form. So yeah, it was just email. So it was a lot of spreadsheets.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure those were heady times. Another question we have here, and by the way, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature. Another question we have is how do you automatically assign signers and reviewers? Okay, so I guess a few more details on that.
Yeah. So in the routing step setup, so we have I have 3 review steps for mine, and 2 of them are applicant driven, and the third one is automatically assigned to the vice president for research. There's a way to set default reviewer, just put in that email address, and then there's a checkbox to automatically assign reviews to that person. So once the previous step is done, it automatically assigns it to him.
And that's a real benefit because basically we have the best of both worlds, right? So we have within one competition, first applicant driven routing steps for the first 2 levels, which is chair and associate dean for research. But then the 3rd level is automatically assigned. If we moved to the solution for one of our problems that was recommended that we have a 4th stage, we could have automatic first to Office of Research, then applicant driven, and then back to automated. But you have to think, as Chetna said, you really have to think about what you want to do and the potential repercussions ahead of time. And this is where testing can actually be helpful as you're setting up, especially when you're doing those multi-stage reviews.
One comment about testing competitions you set up. If you do plan on launching a competition for test purposes, I know that can be a little anxiety inducing because you may think, well, it'll be posted on the homepage. Well, you can actually hide it from the homepage by backdating the removal date to a date in the past.
We do this all the time now. Yeah.
So that should, address that need and relieve a little bit of the anxiety. I know it's not going to relieve all of it, but it won't be on that competition won't be on stage. Let's see, we have more questions here. What happens if an approver or reviewer denies a request? Is the requester automatically notified of the denial? And are comments added with reason for not approving? So 3-part question. Let me know if you need me to repeat any of those as you answer.
So we do require comments, and if they deny a request, they will put it in there. We haven't had a lot of denials, but a key point here is the approve or do not approve does not trigger anything with the next routing step. So if the first routing step does not approve it, it does not mean that the next reviewer automatically still gets it. So at that point, we go through and delete the next reviewer assignments. So it stops the review process, and we look to address the issue that has happened. You can't override, it's hard to reset that review step. You can, I won't go into the details how, but you can, usually we just email that person to figure out what to do.
You can change your review.
Yes, you can change the review.
And so ethically, this is something that we don't do, but we do pursue and we do utilize that feature. And so this is the experience that I have had a few times with when it gets to the vice president for research level, that something is denied. With these particular approval processes, it's not a competition, it's an approval process. So generally what Chetna and I do, well, always what I do is I reach out to all parties. This is where email is involved, and I'll say, we got to do this, we got to change that. I process the changes via email. I edit the application on the back end, and then with permission, I change the review to approved, and then I set the award. And what's wonderful is that even with the 3 stages of review, that does not trigger an award. We make the award. So if my boss doesn't approve it, I work on it till he does, change it, and then I send the award, or in our case, the approval notice.
Thanks for sharing those details, Christina. I have a question for you. So you have a sequential process. Step 1 has to be complete before the 2 begins, etc. So 2 questions for you, actually. In the system, did you set it up so that the reviewer in step 2 can see what the reviewer in step 1 had to say?
For this case, absolutely, because we're talking about approval for somebody to come on campus, utilize facilities. So the whole point is that everybody knows what's going on. And I'm going to piggyback on that with something you don't want to know, but I'm going to tell you anyway, is that this process is actually going to probably persist even when we no longer require vaccination credentials. And that is because this represents the first central institutionalized list of academic visitors on campus at any given time. This is something we've been asked for repeatedly before this was developed, and no one has ever had those sort of informal but longer than a few days visit information. So now we have departments, associate deans of schools and colleges, and the vice president for research knowing, at least, having some back of the head knowledge of who's around, who's coming on, what they've seen, what they've gotten requests for, what kind of visitors we're getting, how many, people are coming into particular units. And that's a good amount of institutional information that nobody had been holistically capturing before, unless it was specifically for international visitors.
Well, thanks for adding that. That's definitely interesting to hear that it all got dropped on your plate.
Yeah, it's a whole nother seminar. It's probably not for this.
My second question related to that, did you set it up so that you as administrators got a notification every time a routing step was completed for an application?
Yeah. So even though Chetna said that she checks the dashboard to see where something is stuck, I've gotten to the point now, because these are lower volumes. These aren't like our over 100 applications at a time for a funding competition. So she pushes things along by her phone. I check when I get into one approval, I almost always go in and just send those pings. I hit that send button because it is so easy and it speeds it up. And we have felt the pain of when the process was slow, so we know the value of taking those couple clicks to speed it up.
Thanks, Christina. Here is a question about resources in the Office of Research. Logistically, could you speak about staff size from your office that focused on InfoReady, or is it just you 2 ladies?
I should let Chetna talk a little bit. This is that whole other seminar about work-life balance and all that stuff, right? So we have Jeff Falchi, who is our functional business analyst, who is actually the, what they call master administrator, or whatever the term is for the system. So he is our tech support and facilitates a lot of the technical issues. But as we've grown with our uses, Chetna and I have become pretty techie when it comes to facilitating, problems or issues and reaching out for assistance. We have a lot of administrators that manage their own competitions within the system. But the things we're telling you about today and our wealth of intramural grant programs and our 100 limited submissions are all done in-house.
Yeah. And I'll add, so we will have, so I saw Katie Rupert, actually. Christina, did you notice Katie was on the call?
I haven't looked at participants. Sorry if I didn't give shout out.
So we have a number of our SU colleagues here on the line, and they manage competition as well. So at the school and college level or other administrative units will also manage competitions. And then our undergraduate research group, they do several competitions as well and manage that. So we focused on 5 of those 6 administrative approvals that we outlined, and we also do intramural funding. We manage those competitions as well as limited submissions. And I'm sure there are other things that we are managing as well.
Odds and ends, right?
Yeah, odds and ends. That's us.
Yeah, you know what, and that's why I really, I hate to be a Sally Sunshine here, but you gotta open your mind to the possibilities. And I think that our first year we were scared. We would attend a lot of these webinars and see people are using it for poster sessions, that people are using it for reservations for this or that or the other thing. And we're like, it was just way, way, way too much. It was all we could do to get our hands wrapped around a large intramural grant program. But then we did another program. Then we did another program. Then we facilitated another unit to use it. Then we got through a couple rounds. And once we started playing around, the more we could play around. Now I really think about, well, we can do anything in here, just about, right? And there's still fits and starts, and there's still a lot of information overload when you have to accompany this with emails for stuff that doesn't work. But honestly, I'm just so very encouraged about how we've been able to use it, and I cannot think of what we would do without it. So that's, for me, I'm just a huge supporter of the use of it.
Oh, thanks, Christina.
Yeah, and just from the templates are so useful, and the notification templates, I don't have to rewrite the email. I don't have to remember what I said in my last email. It's all right there. That's just so easy.
Great stuff there. Thanks for sharing that. We were talking about, you're talking about who uses InfoReady in your office, and we actually have a couple questions, different flavors related to who's using it. So the first question asks, do you ask other campus users who manage competitions to chip in on the InfoReady subscription? How do you manage the administrator seats?
Jenna, you wanna?
So we do have 25 administrative seats. That's a lot. But considering Christina, Jeff, another associate who's affiliated with our office has them. There's several people in sponsored programs who has them. Our undergraduate office, our IRB office, that's 10 seats right there. And then we have a few schools and colleges that have rolling competitions that they use it for example, one of our colleges uses it for proposal review. This is their red line proposal review. Send it in and we'll take a look at it, and they've automated it through that. And then a number of colleges use it for their internal competitions or department level ones. It's complex. Every month we get that report of our admin seats, and we will go through and say, hey, do you still need this? You did this department competition 6 months ago. Is it closed? Can we remove you? We do not ask people at this time to put in to fund it. It's funded it's not even funded through our office. It's the Office of Research generally. And they're we use 94% of the InfoReady capacity. So the other capacity it doesn't make sense to try to.
Well, and it's not even that too, because there are a lot of competitions that aren't ours, and the bulk of the administrators aren't ours. But the way I view it right now, and I'll hold this line until I'm forced not to, is that this is something that our office provides as a service to the institution. I'm a librarian by trade and by degree, and I see this as a service, and we are a service entity. Until which time we get a unit that wants to have a predominant percentage of the use of the system, I believe this should be supported by our office. But because we have not a lot of money to do so, that's why we invest the time and try to invest the time in moving seats around so we could stay where we're at without causing a greater financial burden. And yet we're still the champions of the system and the people that really help enable the institution to use it. So I'm pretty passionate about that decision. I hope we can stay that way.
Yeah, there was one case where it looked like, so we do research travel, but it looked like HR wanted to look at using InfoReady for just general travel needs for staff and so forth. And they were going to administer it. And because it was going to take, several seats, we were we told them that we would need to ask for funding for those administrative seats. And in the end, they decided that I'm not sure if they use Qualtrics or they decided not to do a form. They might not be tracking it,
But by supporting usages for so many other units, which are usually like a one time a year type thing, maybe two
Yeah.
competitions a year for some units, by supporting this across the institution, we are also gaining a heck of a lot of institutional familiarity with the subject, which then begets comfort by our users, which then begets more activity and people who aren't afraid to use it. So there's a lot of good behind being the sole, the only buck in.
Carlos, I do want to get to Jessica's question because I have found adding fields, challenge number 5. So Jessica asked, going back to challenge number 5, the lack of a two-way after applications accepted. I just did this on our large intramural funding program. We added a question because after review, we have teams that these are assigned to for review, but it's not necessarily the same reviewers and so forth. So it's clunky to figure out how to do that. We added a question there to say, this is in team 5. And, just multiple choice, make sure it's multiple choice. And now we can filter in the dashboard by each team. And it has just made it so much easier to assign reviewers, to check on the status of a review, all the proposals in one panel. So thank you so much, Carlos, for recommending just adding in administrative questions, because that's been really helpful.
Yeah, so we immediately started using it for multiple purposes, but I will tell you that your applicants can still put stuff in there. It's not a protected screen, it's an optional screen. So I've had people write their own comments. I'm like, that's not what it's for, but that's okay. We don't need to keep them in there. And I rip them out, so.
I'm glad that that's been helpful. Another way where you could have kind of different stages is to leverage the letter of intent feature to collect initial information and even have routing steps there. And then when you convert to phase 2, you can select who advances and collect additional information in the application form and have more routing steps from there. That may not work for everyone, but that's just an idea. We're closing in on the end of time. There was another question related to managing admin permissions. So this one asks, how do you ensure confidential information such as vaccination records are kept confidential?
So for a competition, only the admin and the global admins have access to that. So there's only 3 of us that have access to the competition backend, I think.
And that's actually, I'd be happy to talk more offline about that, but this is something that we've struggled with. And part of the reason that we switched from providing the information for the visiting scholars to our human resources office, who managed our attestation process. So it became part of the online SU identity system. And when it was opened up and we had to accept and process compliance of vaccination records, our HR dropped this and said, nope, Office of Research has to do visiting scholars. We've got 7,500 documents we have to process for faculty, staff, and students. We're not doing visiting scholars. And so we then became the office that reviews and approves credentials. And one of the things they told us when they said that is we can't accept them by email. So we had to develop a process to do it in the system, which we do consider secure and has passed our information security review as being secure and compliant as an institutional tool.
Thanks, Christina. Time check, by the way, it's 2 minutes to the top of the hour.
Yep. So I think
so that's it for questions. If you have any more questions for InfoReady or for our great presenters today, feel free to reach out to us. Christina and Chetna's email addresses are on screen. And then my contact information along with my colleague Max Dinerman's contact information is on screen. You can also email your account manager or email the support team at support@InfoReadyCorp.com. A few more items of note. The next Peer Spotlight webinar is Tuesday, April 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern. That's going to cover undergraduate research, and the host there is Dr. Christine Johnson, AVP in the division of the Vice President for Research at Oklahoma State. So we'll have the registration link available on our website for that. On top of that, I mentioned the listserv once. If you'd like to join the listserv, let us know. I forgot to add a poll question to easily collect that information today, but feel free to reach out to us. And then there's also a referral program out there. If you have a colleague at another institution who's not using InfoReady, you can actually get a discount on your annual license if you refer them and they adopt the system. I put out a poll question to see if anyone was interested in being a panelist on a future webinar. So if you're interested, let us know in that poll. And with that, one final big thank you to our panelists today. You great job out there to share lots of great information. Wonderful job embarrassing me because I can't take a compliment very well.
That's fine. I figure you've been asking for a year, so we finally stepped up. And I have to go, but thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
And one thing, we will have the slides posted on our website, so our trainings and presentations website. So I put the link there. If anybody wants to grab the file of the presentation, we'll post it there shortly. And then I know InfoReady does the recording as well.
Yep. Great point there. We recorded this session and we'll make this available in the next week after we do some edits, and we'll gladly share it. We'll have it posted on our site and we'll also email it out. Thanks everyone for your time today. Thanks again to the team from Syracuse, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.